Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, September the 23rd, 2025. Today there is an opposition aspect between the Sun and Neptune, and in this video I will be going into some detail about this aspect and its meaning and what kind of impact we might expect. But first of all, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today. So here is a chart for New York, set for noon today, Tuesday, September the 23rd. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So the moon is in Libra, sort of late Libra. So at noon New York time, it's at 21 degrees of the sign, and that means that the moon is moving through the Via Combusta. I sort of do this reminder every month. Sorry if that sounds rather boring, but the Via Combusta is that part of the sky between 15 degrees Libra and 15 degrees Scorpio, and the moon has now entered the Via Combusta. And when you've got the moon in the Via Combusta, things don't necessarily always work out to plan. There may be unexpected events. Also, the moon in the Via Combusta can be used in horary charts. I mean, there is a view that moon in the Via Combusta, between 15 degrees Libra and 15 degrees Scorpio, can indicate something might go wrong, or the result might be somewhat unexpected. I don't think in my experience it necessarily says that the result won't happen. I mean, for example, I remember when I took my driving test, that was a long time ago. I took my driving test late. I'm not a natural driver. I think that was in 1992. I was around 30 when I took my driving test, and I did a horary about, will I pass my driving test? And the moon was in the Via Combusta. I mean, I thought the chart looked okay, but I was a bit worried about the moon in the Via Combusta. So, I took my driving test, and I was having my sort of last lesson before the test, and the instructor told me to slow down, and I slowed down, and someone went into the back of me. So there was an accident sort of just before the driving test, and so it was completely weird. And the driving instructor had never had an accident in his car before, and I actually went back to the driving instructor's home. So all the sort of boundaries had been kind of broken there, and we were just sitting there, and I said to him, and he was in shock. I mean, I think he was perhaps in more shock than me. And I said to him, well, what about my driving test? And so he'd forgotten about my driving test. And so his car, because in the UK you generally take your driving lessons in the instructor's car, and you take the test in the instructor's car. That's a normal tradition. So he said, "Oh, okay. Well," so we went to the test center, and before the driving test, it was the car was rather smashed up. Part of the body was touching the tire, and he had to sort of use a empty Coke can to sort of put to move a part of the body off the tire. And so he explained to the examiner that there'd been an accident, but I was allowed to take the test. But the thing is, I was driving really badly before the test, because I'm not, as I said, I'm not a natural driver, and maybe I'm over analytical, but I was so shaken up by this accident that I was it knocked out my brain, and so I was sort of in a different space when I was taking the test. And as a result of that, I did pass. I did pass first time. British driving tests are relatively difficult. So most people fail, I think. But anyway, I did pass the driving test. But in the horary that I asked, the moon was in the Via Combusta, and I think that perfectly described what happened. So yes, so in this chart, the moon is in the Via Combusta. That doesn't mean to say that it's going to be terrible. It's just things might happen in a way that might be somewhat unexpected. So aside from that, the moon is making a square to Jupiter. And so moon square Jupiter, that might be a bit excessive. Remember, the moon is in the Virgo square Jupiter. So something might get exaggerated, and as a result of that exaggeration, something could go wrong, or something might happen that is unexpected, or someone might behave in an unexpected way. And of course, when you've got moon square Jupiter, always be careful about taking things too far. Whether it's money or some activity, or being emotionally excessive. I mean, it could be. I suppose moon in Libra likes things to be civilized and balanced, and then Jupiter in Cancer can perhaps be more emotional. But there are other aspects to consider. I mean, we have got Mars Mars is doing things. Mars has just gone into Scorpio, remember, sort of yesterday, Monday. Mars moved into Scorpio. And I'm a bit worried about that Mars. That Mars is exactly opposition my own Mars, so I have to be very careful. I think my own Mars is at 0 degrees 50 Taurus. So that could be a bit of a problem. Mars is also square Pluto, but the Sun and Mars are making a semi-sextile. That's one thing. And Mars and Neptune are making a quincunx. And that link up between Sun, Mars and Neptune is possibly a source of worry, and goes back to my own aspect between Mars transiting my Sun. Sorry to talk about myself so much. Please just indulge me for a bit. So my Mars is at 0 degrees 50 Taurus. So there are a lot of planets at 0 degrees 50. There's Sun at around 0 to 50 degrees 50, Mars at around 0 degrees 50, and Neptune at 0 degrees 50. So I'm concerned. Well, I'm not sure that things are going to be okay, but hopefully nothing too bad is going to happen tomorrow as Mars moves into Scorpio. I'll perhaps report back, but then of course if it's that bad I probably won't be reporting back, will I? So as far as what all of this means, I mean, the big aspect is of course Sun opposition Neptune, and it's all part of that Saturn-Neptune. Well, we've got a Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the Sun sort of opposition Saturn and Neptune close to the Aries point, and the Sun opposition Neptune is close to the Aries point. So there is a lot of confusion around. And also when you're thinking about Sun opposition Neptune, well, think about water, chemicals, toxins, toxic substances, gas leaks. This is all Sun opposition Neptune stuff. And yes, there could be some deception, and perhaps quite unpleasant deception, because Mars is involved. Mars is making that quincunx to Neptune, also making the semi-sextile to the Sun. And this is of some concern. But I'll be looking at it in a bit more detail at the end of this video. And so there are not a huge amount of astrological aspects today, but those that there are could be quite significant. And I am thinking that this sort of Mars-Sun-Neptune configuration should be taken seriously. So that's the picture in New York. Let's just switch to Sydney, Australia, as a representative of sort of Australasia. And the moon is just a bit earlier in the sign, at noon Sydney time. It's sort of 14:26, but still, from the afternoon onwards, the moon will be in the Via Combusta. So the moon will go into the Via Combusta in sort of Sydney, Australia, around possibly 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe that would be around 3 in the afternoon if you're in New Zealand, but it will get there over the afternoon, over the course of the afternoon. So everything I said about the Via Combusta, it does apply to those of you in Australasia, certainly after lunch. And aside from that, I don't think that there's a huge amount of difference between what's going on in Australasia and what's going on in the United States, for example. And turning to the heliocentric view, here is the heliocentric chart, putting the Sun at the center of the solar system, and look at the Earth. We've just had Earth conjunct Saturn, or Sun opposition Saturn, if you want to look at it geocentrically, and now the Earth is conjunct Neptune. And so that is obvious, because when you've got Sun opposition Neptune, that is the same as Earth conjunct Neptune. So then that Neptunian feel is very much apparent today. And so many of us might feel unsure of ourselves. We could feel confused. We may not be sure about what's going to happen next. And again, we need to be careful with water, gas, poisons, anything that is toxic, chemicals. We should perhaps save the chemistry experiments until later. And aside from that, the Earth is it's still making a sextile to Uranus. I mean, it's just about. I mean, it's not exact, but that does sort of stir things up a little. Saturn is making a sextile to Uranus as well, and Mercury is doing something interesting, because Mercury is at 28 Libra, and so Mercury is quincunx Saturn and quincunx Uranus. So Mercury is on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. And, as I've just said, we've got Saturn-Uranus sextile. So that Saturn-Uranus sextile, whatever it might mean, is really emphasized because of Mercury's transit. And so with Mercury on a Saturn-Uranus midpoint, that just may say something about how people are feeling. It's we've just had the equinox, we've just had the new moon eclipse, and things are getting difficult and people are nervous. And I think that Mercury opposition the Saturn-Uranus midpoint does create a high level of tension in the world, and many of us might feel that we're getting wrapped up in it all. And we just need to get a perspective. We shouldn't take it personally, and that's often the way it is. There are things affecting all of us, but some people may take it more personally than others. So that's a heliocentric view, and now I want to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, September the 23rd, 2025. Aries. Mars is your ruler, and Mars is quite active at the moment. Mars has just moved into Scorpio, and I've talked about Mars in Scorpio already, and I've said that overall I think it's a good thing for Mars to be in Scorpio, because Mars is your ruler and Mars is in its own sign. And so because it's in its own sign, you are able to assert yourself, and you have a strong sense of who you are and what you can do. But it is in Scorpio, it's not in Aries. So that doesn't mean to say that you should be taking overt initiatives, that you should be drawing too much attention for yourself. I know you're an Aries, but there is a place for subtlety. So that I think is quite important. But Mars is doing other things. Mars is making a quincunx to Neptune, and it's making a semi-sextile to the Sun. So that means that Mars, your ruler, is very much tied up with the Sun-Neptune opposition. And so, this Sun-Neptune opposition, which also hits you because Neptune is in Aries and the Sun is in Libra, your opposite sign. And this might mean that you feel not entirely comfortable with the way things are going. You just feel almost disconnected. You don't really get it. And maybe the reason you're feeling uncomfortable is perhaps because you're being too much of an Aries. If you are an Aries, you like things to be straightforward. You want everyone to be clear, say what they mean, and you don't want to play guessing games. But at the moment, things aren't straightforward. You might have to guess. And people are going to have strange motives, and they may just deliberately be making things complicated, almost for the sake of it, just to get you annoyed even. I mean, not literally, I don't think, but it is a complicated world and nothing is simple. And if you just reach assumptions, you draw conclusions, you think you know it all, and you act on impulse, then it's not going to work. It's going to backfire. And so, Aries, it's going to be important that today you're able to live with ambiguity. You don't know all the answers. I mean, you'd like to know the answers, but you don't. And you can ask people what they mean. You can ask for clarification, but that could just make muddy waters even muddier. So, what's the best approach? The best approach is to just recognize that Mars is in Scorpio and what that means. Be a Scorpio if you possibly can. So, if you are an Aries and you happen to have, for example, Scorpio rising or moon in Scorpio, it might be easier because you have some familiarity with the Scorpio energy. But, you can be more subtle, and that's the way forward. You don't have to be direct, and there are many ways of getting from A to B, and perhaps you just have to take the long route and just take your time to understand what's going on, and in the process, use your emotions. Your emotions will not necessarily tell you the answers, but they might tell you what is not the case, and they may remind you that some things just can't be taken for granted. And as far as relationships are concerned, the Sun and the Moon and Mercury are in Libra, your opposite sign. So that does suggest that now is a time when you do have to consider other people and what other people are up to. And additionally, the Sun-Neptune opposition right across the main axis of your chart. And you might think that other people are trying their hardest to confuse you. And as a result, you might put some blame on them. But consider an alternative possibility. Maybe it's you confusing them. And that's because Neptune is in Aries. And okay, Neptune is going to go back into Pisces quite soon, but right now it is in Aries, and the Sun is opposition Neptune. And it could be that in reality, other people want clarity. They want to know what you're thinking, what you're planning, what your intentions are, and you're not helping because Neptune is in your sign, and the Sun is making an opposition to Neptune. So for your part, try to be as clear as possible, and just look at the way that you might be acting in a way that is confusing. And finally, I should point out that Mars is quincunx Neptune, Mars is semisextile the Sun, and yes, Mars is linked to the Sun opposition Neptune, and that might, in certain situations, incline you to make mistakes or do something that is unwise. You could do, for example, something that is risky, and maybe you've done it before, but this time round, you're not entirely sure what you're doing. Something could happen that could turn something that is slightly risky into very risky. And so, just because something's worked in the past doesn't mean it will work in the future. And of course, with Mars semi-square, Mars quincunx Neptune, do think about water. Treat water with respect. It's probably not a day for swimming, for example, or playing with sort of complicated plumbing issues that you're not qualified to deal with. So it's not necessarily going to be an easy day, but don't forget, Mars is now in Scorpio. Mars is strong in Scorpio. Overall, you are able to handle things, but you just have to be sort of more subtle, and the usual approach, may not be as successful as it had been, and perhaps you have to find a different approach. It might be more complicated, it might take longer, but I think that would be the right approach. Taurus. There are probably things that you don't entirely understand. I mean, it's a confusing day. I mean, it's confusing for everyone. So you're not being singled out. I've just been talking to Aries, and telling Aries about all the things that might go wrong, and how Aries has to be very careful about how they behave. And with you, well, you have to really try to make sense of it all. I mean, that may be what you need to do. And if you don't understand something, well, make it your business to understand it. And that's not going to be anything immediate. You have to do things, one step at a time. And if you can do that, then I think that, gradually you will make progress. But, there is an opposition between the Sun and Neptune. And, this opposition between the Sun and Neptune, just may represent disintegrating energies. You can try your hardest to ensure that everything is done properly, and you can be very focused. But even then, there may be outside forces that are just unhelpful. It seems that something is making things just more complicated than it need be. And, it's easy to blame other people, but, possibly it's your own imagination, your own thoughts, your own feelings that indicate that at some level you are confused. And you're perhaps confused about yourself. And so you try to do something properly, but something emotional sort of cuts in. And I'm not saying that you should dismiss your emotions or repress your emotions, but you need to understand how they're working and how your own thoughts and feelings could trip you up. And so, decide you're going to do something, and then, give it your best shot. And if you do run into problems, don't just accept the situation. Be ready to ask questions. And if you are able to ask questions and to tell people how you feel, and if you don't understand something, be crystal clear about it. And that way you can probably create a degree of clarity. So there's no point in keeping things to yourself. Openness will be appreciated. I mean, that is in the case of you as a Taurus. I mean, I'm not saying that today, overall, regardless of your sign, is about being open and asking loads of questions. But I think for you, I think it is the right approach. And, don't forget that Mars is now in Scorpio. It's in your opposites. Yeah, it's in your opposite sign. Something I am very aware of. My ascendant is at something like 4 or 5 Taurus, and so I've got In fact, I've got Mars rising in Taurus, so I've got Mars opposition Mars, and in, I don't know, about a week's time, I'll have Mars on my Mars exactly on my descendant, and so there is a Mars on the descendant feel for us Taurians. I mean, I don't normally regard myself as a Taurian, but yeah, I do have Taurus rising, and so that can create aggravation, especially now when Mars is making a quincunx to Neptune, and it's also making a semi-sextile to the Sun. And so because of that, other people could be troublesome. It's like they're trying to sort themselves out, they're trying to work out the right position for themselves, and at the same time they want results, and they could be quite hasty, they could be pushy, and at first, you might try your best to respond. Someone wants something, you try to give it to them, it's not good enough, they complain, you try something else, and so if you are too accommodating to other people, it's just going to make matters worse. And you have to be very clear about what your limits are. And your main job at the moment, Taurus, is to create clarity for yourself. And you want to avoid anything which creates confusion. And one source of confusion, I'm afraid, could be other people. Other people's influence, may in sort of many cases be completely unhelpful. And that's another good reason why you have to speak up for yourself. If you don't like the way things are going, be clear and honest about it. Be ready to talk about your irritation. You don't have to be angry about it. And the sooner you express your displeasure, I think the better for everyone. They will understand your position, and they might back off, or they might sort of moderate their behavior. And so, Taurus, I'm not saying it's going to be a great day, but I think it can be okay, provided you get your priorities right. And your priority is to create order, and you mustn't be tripped up either by other people or by your own feelings. Gemini. We have the moon and the sun and Mercury, moving through Libra. The sun is very much in Libra now. The equinox is behind us. And so perhaps, Gemini, you should be focusing on that Libra energy, and what it means for you. And what it means for you, Gemini, is having confidence in yourself, being yourself, deciding what matters to you. And it is about self-expression and being happy to express yourself and not feeling too self-conscious. I mean, there will be times perhaps when you are unsure of yourself. There is an opposition aspect between the Sun and Neptune. And the Sun opposition Neptune, it could be that certain people are just not being helpful. You know what you want to do, but you're getting mixed signals from other people, perhaps from your friends. They're not giving you the enthusiasm you might like, and you might not appreciate that situation. And also, you could be making things just too complicated for yourself. So, for example, Gemini, you might do something that you really enjoy doing. You're having fun. It's just a fundamental part of your self-expression. But then you start having questions. You're thinking, what's the point? How does this link in with your sort of long-term future? Is it really worth it? And if you start having those doubts, then you might think, well, maybe I should be doing something more serious. And you could end up giving up on something that really is a fundamental part of who you are. And it's not linked to the time you're living, or to particular trends, to what is fashionable, what is not fashionable. It's an essential expression of who you are, and it just goes beyond time. And so do try to understand what is sacred for you. I mean, it's rather like, you sometimes see articles, or people don't read anymore, do they? But you see videos of people who are relatively young, but they decide they want to dress up as sort of Victorians, or they want to dress up as in sort of Regency costume, and they want to live their life like that. And it's easy to criticize such people, but if you want to lead your life in a particular way, and it feels itself to be an essential part of your self-expression, then just go and do it. And worrying about whether it's dated, even if it's 500 years out of date, that shouldn't matter. And perhaps it is a time when you can link with the past and link with your past, and if it feels good, then Gemini, it probably is good. And also, Gemini, I don't want to give the impression that right now you're completely ungrounded, because you're not. You are grounded, and you understand your limitations. You don't just understand your limitations; you understand society's limitations, and what you can do and what you can't do, and you have a good understanding of the way authority works, and because of that, you should be able to make the right path for yourself. You'll know how far you can go. And so overall, Gemini, if you think about yourself and you think about what is important to you, then I think today can be pretty fulfilling. Cancer. The moon is still in Libra, and it's now definitely joined by the Sun and Mercury. The equinox is over, the immediate phase of the equinox, and this does mean that you are kind of aware of your own priorities, and you know what you want, you know what you can do, you know what you can perhaps get away with. And there's probably no need to worry too much about what's going on around you. I mean, you can observe, but you don't necessarily have to be part of it. And your own home and your own space is really going to matter to you. So I don't think that you have to stray too far off the beaten path. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. And for many Cancerians, while the moon is moving through Libra, it might be the best place. Well, home might be the best place for you, somewhere where you feel safe and secure. And the moon is in the Via Combusta, and so it might be the case that you just have a feeling that things won't necessarily go to plan, that if you take risks, or if you go somewhere you've never been before, or if you give in to outside pressure, just something could go wrong. And Cancerians have a good intuition. I mean, of course, Cancer is a water sign. I mean, intuition is perhaps the wrong word, but you just have a set of feelings which could warn you of trouble. You can just see the way things are going to go, and so do trust your feelings, because I think your feelings are they're looking after you. And additionally, we do have a square aspect between the moon and Jupiter. This is the main sort of lunar aspect. Moon in Libra, square Jupiter in Cancer, and this square may not be so bad, provided you you stick to what you know and trust. You know what you can do. Jupiter's in Cancer, it's in your sign, and it's been picked up by the moon in Libra. So where you are is where you're going to feel best, and there could be moments in a day where you are somewhat self-indulgent, but I don't think that's necessarily too much of a problem. You are looking after yourself and looking after your own interests, and you want to feel good, you want to feel comfortable, you want to feel supported, and that can all happen, and there's no need to worry too much about outside pressure. And remember, there is an opposition between the Sun and Neptune, and Neptune might represent a temptation, or someone or something trying to confuse you. You might be happy in your world, but Neptune out there is trying to encourage you to just move a bit further, to sort of move beyond your boundaries. It might be tempting, but if you do get those kind of temptations, if you're being encouraged to do something you don't really want to do, then I think Cancer is just best to hold firm. Leo. There is an opposition aspect between the Sun and Neptune. I mean, this is important. The Sun is your ruler. And so with the Sun opposition Neptune, you could argue that things might not be straightforward. I mean, you'd like them to be straightforward, but something is confusing you, and you might possibly, reach the wrong conclusions, or something might be very attractive and you want to find out more about it, and it may just take you down the wrong path. And there could be an ideological aspect to this Sun-Neptune opposition. Sun-Neptune opposition is for you, Leo, could be about what you believe in, and your philosophy, or your political ideas. And perhaps if you think about what you believe in, then it could all be rather confusing, and you may have questions about what you believe in. There may be certain things that you have absolutely taken for granted. This is the way the world works. This is this is where you are going to take a stand. And then you think about it, and well, does that really make sense? And so it could be that some of your political and philosophical views with the Sun opposition Neptune are fluid, are becoming fluid. And in certain cases, it may be a time when Leos have to let go of beliefs that you might have held on to for sort of years and years. And this is a larger process. Don't forget that Neptune stays in Aries for a long time. Okay, it's true that Neptune is about to go back into Pisces quite soon, but then that's only because it's retrograding. Then it will go direct. By next year, it will be in Aries. It will stay in Aries until I think 2038. I think something like that. And this might be a time when when many of your beliefs change. So if you think about your beliefs right now, Leo, consider the possibility that many of them will have dramatically changed in, say, 5 years' time. And the Sun-Neptune opposition could also have a spiritual dimension. And I'm not just using the word spiritual because it's it's something vague to sort of fill in time. Sun is opposition Neptune, and Neptune is in Aries, which is quite a spiritual sign in your chart. And so Sun opposition Neptune, it is a time, Leo, when you can be aware of something else, something which is beyond you, which you don't fully understand, which may also be challenging you. And it could be that there are events today, not necessarily huge events, although the moon is in the Via Combusta. Anything can happen with the moon in the Via Combusta. But there may be events which give you pause for thought. And these events may be taking place in your own life, but they may also be taking place on the news. You see something that you don't like, that you find it confusing, and you're not quite sure how to respond. And perhaps, your old way of responding just doesn't seem right, and it's all becoming rather confusing, but it's there for a purpose. It's there to sort of move you along. And so don't be too tied to your own beliefs, because, as I've already said, your beliefs are in a stage of flux, and this flux could continue for years. Remembering that Neptune is going to be in Aries for a long time after it's sort of had its brief visit visit into Pisces. It's going to stay there until 2038. So just get ready for that kind of change. And finally, Leo, don't do anything which is risky, particularly involving water, but other things as well. Sun is opposition Neptune at its worst. You could say that Sun opposition Neptune. I really am taking at its worst. Sun opposition Neptune could be an accident involving water. Just look at it like that. So, for example, it's not a time for swimming. It's not a time for getting too close to water, to getting dangerously close to water. And it's not just about swimming, and accidents involve water. It can be about playing around with water, leaks, anything to do with water needs caution, but not just water. I think at the moment, Leo, you're probably sort of more accident prone than usual. So I would suggest that you do tread quite carefully. Virgo. The moon and Mercury and the sun are still in Libra. The sun is very much in Libra now. Yesterday, we had the equinox, so for some of you, the sun was, taking its time to move into the sign. So, the question is, was the sun in Virgo? Was the sun in Libra? But, now it's in Libra for everyone. And so, with all that Libra emphasis, inevitably, there has to be some possibility that financial issues, come to the fore. I've already said this. And so, when it comes to money, do think about what you're doing, and, don't leave things to chance. And, also remember that the sun is opposition Neptune. And the Sun-Neptune opposition, may not be easy. And, as a Virgo, you like things to be straightforward. Virgo is an earth sign, and when it comes to money and financial details, you're usually pretty good. But with Sun opposition Neptune, you might temporarily sort of lose your touch, and you might be unsure of the way things are working out, the way things are going, and it's easy for you to be confused. You might think you completely understand something of a financial or material nature, but it's more complicated than you realize. And perhaps you have to just go into today with the view that nothing is going to be straightforward, and that if you're dealing with money, things could go wrong. Now, that might mean that financial issues today should just be avoided. Perhaps you've got a meeting today or tomorrow where you're meant to be discussing money, where you're supposed to get down to sort of the financial details, but perhaps you should leave it for later. Let this Sun opposition Neptune, the influence of this Sun opposition Neptune, pass, because I do think that it could be, quite a difficult influence. Though I don't think that you're going to be making really serious mistakes, because you have a good understanding of regulations and rules and laws, and I think that you'll know how far you can go, and I don't think it's a time when you're going to be sort of breaking rules, because I think you understand the rules, you understand administrative systems, you understand the organization, you understand how authority and government works, and perhaps this says something about what you might want to focus on today. It's not so money, specific area of money is possibly something you should avoid. On the other hand, if you want to take on authority figures or discuss things with people in authority, then I think that you could be quite effective. You'll know how to behave, and you may know the rules and the regulations better than the other person. So don't underestimate your legal abilities. Even if you're not a lawyer, over time you have gathered quite a good understanding of rules and regulations, even if that doesn't seem obvious to you. So it's a day that is not necessarily going to be particularly easy. I think it's a day when you have to be on your guard, and things could go wrong, especially on a material level, and it may not be your fault. It just might be that there are sort of confusing influences, and some people just want to make things complicated. You being a Virgo, you want things to be straightforward, but finding that kind of clarity, where everyone is honest with each other, that could be hard work. Libra. There is quite a lot going on today, and not just today, tomorrow as well. So I'm not convinced that today and tomorrow are just completely separate entities. Although it is true that tomorrow the moon will be in Scorpio, but aside from the moon moving into Scorpio tomorrow, we have a sort of grand trine, and we've got a kite. So let me just show you what I'm looking at. So as I've been talking over the course of this video, I have been mentioning the Sun opposition Neptune a lot. And you've got the Sun in Libra opposition Neptune in Aries, and this aspect certainly has an impact on you. I mean, the Sun is in your sign, and it's opposition Neptune, and I'll be talking about that in a moment. But the Sun is starting to aspect Uranus and Pluto. So there is Uranus at 1 degree 20 Gemini, Pluto 1 degree 28 Aquarius, the Sun aspecting both. So we've got a grand trine in air signs, and we've got the Sun opposition Neptune. So there is the kite. So there's if you like, the sort of the main triangle of the kite, and there is the spine of the kite. Do people use kites anymore? I mean, I think that drones must have really taken over from kites. I mean, kites, I haven't flown a kite for a long time. They used to be sort of really amazing things, the way they go so high up in the air, and you just had to run with this thing. And but now you've got drones. You just turn something on and you press a button, and before you know it, it's 500 feet in the air, or whatever the legal limit is. And so this kite, it is probably a good thing, but it's not going to be entirely straightforward, because the Sun opposition Neptune across the main axis of your chart. And so you might say with Sun opposition Neptune, you're trying to make sense of things. Sun in Libra, it's the Libran season, And, it's a time of the year when Librans, are on good form, you're in control, you have a good idea about, what you want to do. But then Sun opposition Neptune, something happening that doesn't make sense, that is confusing. You're not quite sure how to respond. And of course, it may say quite a lot about relationships. So any sort of one-to-one relationship that you're in may be difficult to work out. It's not that there's necessarily going to be any sort of hostility or any arguments, but it just could be about confusion. Neptune is a planet of smokescreens, and other people are not always going to be honest. Now, if you've been sort of spending your life with someone for decades and you're with them all the time and you know and trust each other, well, fair enough. But if you're dealing with someone who you don't know that well, then that Sun opposition Neptune may indicate an area of confusion. Perhaps it's something they're not revealing. They might be deliberately deceptive. I mean, that is possible. Even if they're not being deliberately deceptive, even if they're trying their hardest to be straightforward, you might not understand what's happening and might not understand what's going on. And so perhaps, Libra, you should be wary about making spot decisions about another person's personality or their motivations. You might have got it wrong, or you might have incomplete information. Yet that Sun opposition Neptune is part of a wider structure. It is part of the kite, and Sun is trine Uranus, trine Pluto, and this might indicate that you are being influenced by something which is beyond yourself. And confusion, we see confusion as being something negative, but confusion can be a healthy response. If we don't know what's going on, we're confused. If we are not confused, then that might just indicate arrogance. We think we know all the answers. We're not going to be confused. We're going to look at what we want to see, and we're going to reach the right conclusions. We think they're the right conclusions, and things might then go very wrong because we've been arrogant. So the word confusion might imply a degree of humility, just knowing that we don't know all the answers, and perhaps we can be sort of part of something beyond us and just have a certain awe at sort of the whole sort of power of the universe. And maybe that's how the Sun-Neptune opposition should really work. It's just about you just knowing that you don't know. And if you know that you don't know, then you can be open to anything. You can be open to all possibilities. You can be open to the possibility that things are bad, that someone is up to no good. You can also be open to the possibility that you're dealing with someone who is absolutely amazing, who wants the best for you. And so that is especially the case when it comes to relationships. And additionally, the moon is making a square to Jupiter. Moon in Libra making a square to Jupiter in Cancer. And I think that aspect may not be so bad. I mean, it's an aspect that is in angular signs from a Libran perspective. Sun in Libra, Jupiter in Cancer, both planets are in cardinal signs, and perhaps this aspect, will allow you to project your ambitions. Be clear as far as you can be about what you want. I mean, that you don't know everything, hopefully. That it's an ill-defined problem, in terms of what you want. You thought it was well-defined, but it's not a time for drawing concrete conclusions at the moment. But if you can sort of gently introduce your ideas, and you can make it clear that you haven't got all the answers, I think that will be appreciated. And if you need help, if you want clarification and you're not getting clarification, then it's okay to ask for it. Because on a verbal level, you continue to be really quite effective. And this is something I've been saying for quite a long time, for the last week or so, but it continues. And verbally, you're able to express your feelings and your doubts, and I think that people will listen. So it's a day which could be quite cosmic because of this grand trine, because of this kite, and the key thing is not to feel that you've got all the answers, to know that there are more things to discover, and that things are confusing, and if you can live with confusion and deal with confusion, you'll be okay. Scorpio. Mars is, of course, in your sign, and if you listened to my video for yesterday, Monday, you would remember that I was very positive about Mars being in Scorpio. Mars is in Scorpio till the beginning of November, and as far as I'm concerned, that's great. It really makes you powerful, really powerful, and you can forge forward, with whatever it is that you want. But that doesn't mean to say that you should be reckless. There are times when you need to, think about what you're doing, and perhaps realize that you could at times be running into trouble, like today. And the problem about today is that Mars is making a semi-sextile to the Sun, and also Mars is making a quincunx to Neptune, and that seems to me to indicate that there are things happening which you're kind of refusing to integrate. Now, Scorpio as a sign, it's fixed. It can be very stubborn. You have a way of working, you have a way of thinking, and you know what you want, you know what you don't want, you know what you know what you want to avoid. And with Mars quincunx Neptune in particular, there's something you don't like, and there's something you just don't want any part of, because it's just too difficult, it's too confusing, and you just don't want to know. And with Mars quincunx Neptune, there is a possibility that you sort of deliberately shut your eyes. You know deep down that you should be dealing with something, but you're deciding not to. And short term, that might be the comfortable approach, but is it the right approach? I don't think it is, because this is a quincunx, and quincunx is about having a sort of a difficult situation, something that doesn't fit. And when I was learning astrology, there was this at the Faculty of Astrological Studies. I was taught by this man called Ron Gwynn, and he described quincunxes as being a bent pipe, and I think he was a surveyor, so he was into sort of building analogies, and he said a quincunx was like a bent pipe, but you don't know where to put it. It just is a strange object, but there is one place where it fits perfectly, and you have to find that place it fits. And maybe this is what the Mars quincunx Neptune is about, that you have to integrate that Neptune. Neptune is an area of confusion, something you don't fully understand. Maybe even you don't even want to understand. But if you neglect it, then it's just going to stay. It's going to stay there. It's not going to go away. And so maybe, Scorpio, there's something you have to confront, an area of confusion in your life. It seems to be confusion, but maybe it represents something else, something really very wholesome that could be integral to who you are. And, because it's Neptune, it might have something to do with your unconscious. It could have something to do with the past, or it might be some aspect of your daily routine. You're running your life in a particular way. You don't want to have too much change, day to day, but maybe there's just something else you need to bring into your life that would make things easier. Now, it could be, just here's an idea, that it could be something like prayer or meditation or some spiritual practice. It doesn't matter what your religion is, what your spiritual view is, but there could be some spiritual practice you need to bring into your life. It might seem tedious. It is. It can be. I've tried learning meditation on several occasions. I'm not a Scorpio, but I never had much success with meditation. I always tried to begin with. I would try to meditate at particular times. At other parts of my life, I've had, when I've gone for sort of something, but quasi-spiritual, you do it every day and you hope it gets you somewhere. And but then I'm a Gemini. Maybe I was overthinking it. You're a Scorpio, and you perhaps have a greater intensity of purpose. So there just could be something that you need to integrate of a spiritual or religious nature. Whether it's prayer, meditation, some kind of ritual, whatever it might be, and you make it part of your life, provided it's right for you. Don't just listen to me. I'm not here to give you spiritual advice. Who am I to give spiritual advice? I'm the last person that should be doing that. But, do give that some consideration, Scorpio. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, there's perhaps not a huge amount going on at the moment. Okay, there is a square between the moon and Jupiter, that's true. And that moon square Jupiter, it's okay as far as it goes, but it could be annoying. It could lead you in the wrong direction. It could be annoying on a social level. Having to deal with people. Part of you wants to deal with people. There's 3 planets in Libra, so Libra is a very sociable sociable sign, and so you might find that you are doing a lot of socializing, over the course of the day, or you might want to do a lot of socializing, but when you're with people, it might not be entirely satisfactory. You might think that something is just missing, and perhaps you would rather be alone. You'd rather be in your own world, and why worry too much about other people, because other people have their own priorities and they want to do things and you don't want to do things, and it just may be difficult. Though perhaps, Sagittarius, the challenge here is to be assertive, to be gently assertive. And, when you're with people, make sure that you have a degree of control. Ask yourself, where is this meeting going? Where is this conversation going? And if it's not going in an area that you like, then you can do something about it. You can move the conversation or the meeting or whatever it is in a direction that is more in accord with your priorities. And also, Sagittarius, you do have the ability to create rapid social change if you want to. That might mean that you can get on with someone very quickly. You meet someone for the first time, and if you have a positive approach, then things can move very quickly. And so if you want to get to know someone rapidly, then I think you might be able to do it. Though, the main aspect today is an opposition between the Sun and Neptune. I think that this Sun opposition Neptune, it does sort of give hints about today, and that perhaps the real underlying issues of other people and the problems they can bring is that you're just going to be concerned that, yeah, that other people do have priorities and that they're taking you in a direction you don't want to go, and you're all the while you're thinking about what you would want, what you want to do, what is important for you, what you're here for. You're not here to amuse other people or to pander to other people's needs. You have to think about yourself, but it just may be quite difficult to make it clear, what you really want at first. But if you make the effort and you try your hardest to be clear, then I think you can be clear. And I think that once everyone understands what you want and when they understand your priorities, things should be okay, and your social life can work to plan, and you can find a sort of an adequate level of cooperation. Capricorn. At the moment, Capricorn, you're probably quite ambitious, like yesterday, and you've got 3 planets in Libra, and so with 3 planets in Libra, and you've got the equinox as well. You've just had the equinox. The sun has gone into Libra, and so this is a time, Capricorn, when you're thinking about what you would like to do and what you can do, and you may have a sense of your own ability and your power, and that's all well and good, though there is an opposition aspect between the Sun and Neptune, and the Sun-Neptune opposition perhaps is about you trying your hardest to forge a path for yourself, to perhaps have quite a high profile. And after all, there are things you want to do, there are people you want to engage with, you want to make an impact, but something might appear to be letting you down. And that Neptune, Sun opposition Neptune, represents something quite sort of deep down, of perhaps of an emotional level, and you kind of feel a lack of security. Even if things are really moving your way, things are really flowing, you're just wondering, how is it going to work out? Are you destabilizing yourself? And you might even sort of have doubts about yourself and where you've come from, whether you're good enough even. So that's all possible, and that could be undermining, because Sun opposition Neptune, it is a difficult aspect. No doubt about it. And so perhaps, Capricorn, you need to try as hard as you can to remind yourself of what your grounding is, because you're a Capricorn. Capricorn is a very grounded sign. It's an earth sign, and so it doesn't really become you to feel unsure of your roots, to be unsure of your security, whether you've got sufficient establishment to see something through. And therefore, Capricorn, it's important that you don't undermine yourself, because at the moment, Capricorn, you are able to make an impression. You might have your doubts. You might be wondering, what people are thinking of you. You might think that, you're not good enough, that you might not appear knowledgeable enough, but this is, to an extent, an illusion. There is an illusion that you are insecure. I wouldn't want to tell you really that you're insecure. I'm not going to be talking about insecurity. You are completely secure, but you might think that you're insecure. And so if you trust yourself and if you believe in yourself, then you can get around this problem. And in fact, there could be a process of transformation. Transforming a situation that seems negative, seems negative because you have your own doubts, and being able to see it through until eventually you start to see the positives. And once you start to see the positives, things become really positive. And so if you give something your all and you have complete belief in yourself, then belief creates belief. And you can come over as someone who is really positive, optimistic, and even happy. Happiness might seem an impossible ideal, but happiness can be found today. And you can have a real joy in what you're doing, Capricorn. But you have to work at it. I know that you shouldn't have to work at it, because you don't really associate the effort of hard work with happiness. Happiness is supposed to be spontaneous. But to begin with, you might have to just make a special effort to be confident and to believe in yourself, and then everything else will unfold in a way that could in the end be quite spectacular. And it's not just about your happiness, it's also about other people's happiness, and you can give a real boost to other people, once you find that core enthusiasm. Aquarius. There is a fair amount going on today, at least from an Aquarian perspective. We have an opposition between the Sun and Neptune. And this Sun-Neptune opposition might say something about some of the people in your life. I mean, the Sun, after all, is ruler of Leo, which is your opposite sign. And so the Sun opposition Neptune might indicate that you are dealing with people who are not very sure of themselves. They are confused. They don't know what to do. They might say they know what to do, but deep down they don't, because they're living in uncertainty. But Sun opposition Neptune is also an aspect that can be connected with deception. And not everyone is going to be honest. I mean, maybe they're not being deliberately dishonest, but they could still get the facts mixed up, and they might say things they don't mean. They could, in certain situations, lie. I mean, that would be completely in accordance with the Sun opposition Neptune symbolism. So I think, Aquarius, there are limits to how far you can trust people. You can only trust people up to a point. And even if they're trying their hardest to be trustworthy, things can happen. People can be unreliable. And so, Aquarius, it's important that, in the final analysis, you are in control. You're not in a situation where your well-being is reliant on the whims of another person. Yeah, you could be let down. And the person letting you down, it might not even appear to be their fault. Things just happen. But aside from that, we do have a grand trine in air signs, and also we have the Mars moving into Scorpio. So Mars did move into Scorpio yesterday, and I probably need to say a little more about that. I mean, Mars stays in Scorpio, I think, until November the 4th. And so overall, Mars in Scorpio for an Aquarian is pretty good. It indicates a time when you can be very focused, very ambitious, and very single-minded. I mean, Aquarius is a fixed sign. Mars is in Scorpio, a fixed sign. So when you decide that you want something, you can really give it everything, and you can really make excellent progress. And so that's the broad picture between now and November the 4th. But today, Mars is quincunx Neptune, and it is semi-sextile the Sun, because we have that Sun opposition Neptune. And so it could be that your first attempts to really concentrate on something, to really focus on what's important to you, your first attempts could be frustrated, and perhaps by other people, by other people's unreliability, perhaps people saying things that they don't mean, or they could confuse you. And it's important that you don't take it too seriously. You are at the start of, a really, powerful time, with Mars moving through Scorpio. But just to begin with, you might not get much help, and you might think that it's all going to come to nothing. But, don't be fooled. This is just a short-term hiccup. And, in a few days' time, when the Sun opposition Neptune is breaking up, when Mars is no longer making a semi-sextile to the Sun, things should be much easier. And of course, tomorrow we've got the Moon making a conjunction to Mars, I think, because the Moon's going into Scorpio. But we also have a grand trine in air signs, and this grand trine in air signs, Sun trine Uranus, Sun trine Pluto, I think that is going to change the situation, and I think that things are going to be probably a lot better tomorrow. It's just going to be easier to get things done, and I think that other people are going to be sort of more cooperative. And just because someone is being completely confusing today doesn't mean that tomorrow it's going to be the same. I think that you perhaps need to bear with people, even if people are appearing to let you down. That doesn't mean to say that's what they're like all the time. It just may be something short term, and over the next couple of days the situation should improve. Pisces. Things are perhaps rather complicated, more complicated than they should be as far as you're concerned. And that continues with the theme from yesterday. I mean, I did talk about sort of growing complications, and what does one mean by complications? Well, what one means is that things are not as simple as they should be. You'd like things to be simple and straightforward. You want to know where you are, and it just does seem that unnecessary complications are coming to the fore. What should be straightforward is not straightforward at all, and it may be that other people are at fault here. They just are not satisfied with anything that's simple. Maybe they just don't know what they're doing. They don't know what's going on, and so that's how they respond to the situation. And from a Piscean perspective, well, the key point is just to try to understand it all. Not by asking a load of questions, just by moving beyond it, not getting caught up in the minutiae, and not, spending a long time questioning other people and worrying about their motivations, and just accepting that this is the world in which you're living, and it's not that things are especially complicated for you. And be tolerant as far as you can. If you are tolerant and accepting, you accept people for all their faults and all their complications, then your open-minded approach will be very much appreciated. People will respond well to you. They're not necessarily going to give you complete honesty. It's very difficult to find honesty today, and you yourself may find it difficult to be honest. But as far as is possible, you can create new connections. And it could be that if you're able to take the initiative, introduce yourself to someone, suddenly appear in a particular crowd of people, you appear from amidst of people, you're just there, and you seem to have a role. People don't quite know what your role is, but you will attract attention, and I think that you will attract favourable attention. Now, one aspect involving Jupiter that we do have is a square between the Moon and Jupiter, and perhaps that square between the Moon and Jupiter is indicating that in certain areas you might sort of overcomplicate things. And it's true, but when it comes to other people, when it comes to the outside world, things are genuinely complicated. But as far as the things that are really important to you are concerned, the things that really matter, the things that are an essential part of your creative self, you don't have to complicate that. Because your uniqueness is very simple. There are no big questions to be asked. You might think it's complicated, but it's not. And if you can just be yourself, then what's more straightforward than that? And so you can worry all you like about what's going on out there. Other people can be doing all sorts of strange things, and it's all going to be boosted by the fact that there's a Sun-Neptune opposition. And yeah, it's there. But if you are authentic, other people might be completely inauthentic. But if you yourself are authentic and you remain authentic throughout the day, then I don't think you've got anything to worry about. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And it's now time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 11, which is peace. So that seems to be, a great hexagram. Everything is in the right place. We have got 3 unbroken lines at the bottom, and the 3 broken lines at the top. So, heaven has come down to earth, and there is a connection between the high and the low. And so the day looks pretty good. And it does seem that things are moving, and we're getting a flow, just a natural flow. It's all coming together, and it looks pretty good. And that might be how the day starts. But we have a moving line. The second from the bottom line moves. And this is kind of an interesting line. And the I Ching tells us, the Legge translation of the I Ching, it says, do not forget the distant. And that's really important advice. And Wilhelm translation says something similar. And don't neglect what is distant. And that means that it's very easy to work in the present, to think about the present, ignore the future. It is said that we are at our happiest, people are happiest when they're not worrying about the past and the future. They're living in the present. And from a spiritual point of view, we're always being told to live in the present. In practice, it is very difficult. And not forgetting the distant means, what are we talking about with the distant? We're dealing with something that could happen in the future. And, of course, the implication there is that whatever it is may not be too fortunate. We may be living in a time of relative prosperity. Things are going, there is flow. But the question is, how long is it going to last for? And it may not last forever. And we must guard against complacency, and we must be ready to take action if and when things start to disintegrate. And that is the natural way of things. Yin and yang. You have times when things are really, really flowing, but you have other times when things start to disintegrate, and that's just the natural. That's the way of things, isn't it? And so don't be complacent. And this hexagram piece, it switches with that second line moving, and it switches to hexagram 36. Now, don't be too worried by this hexagram. It sounds a bit grim. It's not as grim as it looks. And hexagram 36 is darkening of the light. And it's quite clear why that is darkening of the light. This the bottom 3 lines is a very sort of fiery trigram, but it's to do with the sun. Can be connected with the sun below the horizon. The sort of a receptive is above the sun, and so the receptive trigram. And so we may be moving into a time when the light is starting to darken. And yeah, that's not quite as grim as it sounds. Sometimes we have to not show off. We have to, as they say, hide our light under a bushel. It is sometimes necessary. We may be brilliant. We may have a lot to offer, but will it always be appreciated? And so today, yeah, we might feel that things are working to begin with and that perhaps our talents and our abilities are being appreciated, but things can change. And what was in focus one moment can be out of focus the next moment. And, we might feel, for example, that we're getting a less attention than we were, at the beginning of the day. So, I don't know, for example, if you're with other people or you're going into work today, the day might start off very well. You might be someone who's getting attention, people are interested in what you have to say and your good advice and so forth, but by the end of the day it could be completely different. You may be ignored because other things start to crop up, and you shouldn't be worried about this. Darkening of the light doesn't mean that the light has been extinguished. It just means that the light is hidden, and it's something you do in a sort of quite a protective way. If you are not being appreciated, then no need to reveal anything. You can wait, and at a later stage, when things change, you'll have an opportunity to show the light again. And if you look at this in terms of sunset, the sort of sun going below the horizon, well, that's only a temporary state. The sun will inevitably rise again, and that is the natural flow of things. Light follows dark, and dark follows light, and that is, I think, the broad message of the I Ching today. And I want to finish by looking at the opposition between the Sun and Neptune, which I have gone on and on about. And so here is the chart for the Sun-Neptune opposition. I've got it somewhere, and the precise moment, here it is. So the Sun-Neptune opposition, London time, it's going to be opposition today at 1:53 in the afternoon. So it's going to be opposition sort of very late in the day in Australia or New Zealand, very early in the day if you're in the Americas. But it is going to be opposition today. Well, in fact, if you're in New Zealand, that might not be until tomorrow morning. But there is certainly a Sun-Neptune opposition feel to today, and we can say the usual stuff about a Sun-Neptune opposition. The Sun represents, you could say, the life force. It's our self, it's our being, and if it's opposition Neptune, it's being undermined. And I think overall one has to regard the Sun-Neptune opposition as being a negative. And it's difficult to apply oneself. And additionally, with Sun-Neptune opposition, we can think of all the problems that could occur with Sun-Neptune opposition. One thinks of Neptune, one thinks of water, gas, poisons. So we want to steer clear of pollutants, contaminants, and we shouldn't do anything connected with water. I think that is pretty good advice. I mean, okay, you can perhaps go on a ferry, I don't know, in England, cross-channel ferry going from England to France, something like that. That's fine. But if you want to cross the channel in a rowing boat, that might not be such a good idea. And so any risks with water, dangerous activities connected with water, should very much be avoided with this Sun-Neptune opposition. And we can't really look at the Sun-Neptune opposition in isolation. I mean, I don't think that's a good idea. As we know, the Sun is also opposition Saturn, and so it's very much tied in with the uncertainty of Sun opposition Neptune, Sun opposition Saturn. Things are apparently disintegrating, and there is a lot of fear around. And To make matters more difficult, the Sun-Neptune opposition is linked with Mars. And Mars is making a quincunx to Neptune and a semisextile to the Sun. Now, with these semisextiles and quincunxes, I think one doesn't want to use them, too much. One has to use very tight orbs. And so the Sun-Neptune semisextile is only 4 arc minutes apart. The Mars-Neptune quincunx is also 4 minutes. So it's only 4 minutes out. So Mars has a leading role here with this Sun-Neptune opposition. Now, from a psychological perspective, I could say that Mars represents a principle we need to incorporate. So, Sun opposition Neptune, things are confusing, we don't understand what's going on, it's difficult, but somehow we have to find a way of asserting ourselves. But we have to assert ourselves with knowledge, and we have to understand the delicacy of the situation. Now, Mars in Scorpio can be delicate. It's not like Mars in Aries. And so we have to delicately bring order and to be assertive and to make our feelings clear. That's how we can deal with this aspect on a personal level. But from a collective level, governments, groups of people, there isn't that amount of control. It may be out of control, and you can get an idea of this Sun, Mars, and Neptune if you set up a 30-degree dial. So a 30-degree dial is when your dial is 0 degrees. It starts at 0 and ends at 30 degrees. It's quite a straightforward dial to understand. So on a 30-degree dial, the Sun, Mars and Neptune would be in the same place, because the Sun, you knock out the sign. The Sun is at 0 degrees 45, Mars is at 0 degrees 49, and Neptune is at 0 degrees 45. So let me just show you what that looks like. So here is a 30-degree dial. That's a 90-degree dial, but I can change it to a 30-degree dial. So if we have the 30-degree dial, there you can see Sun, Mars and Neptune are all together. And so that really tells us something about, what this energy is, what this energy really is about. And there is perhaps an added problem here if you look at this from a 30-degree point of view, and that might be Hades, because it looks to me as if Sun, Mars and Neptune are opposition Hades on the 30-degree dial. So let's just see where Hades is at the moment. And so Hades, you see, Hades is at 15 degrees 38 Cancer. So on the 15-degree series of aspects, where you go, you have a semi-sextile. You could say that Hades is kind of linked in with this Sun, Mars, Neptune conjunction. Well, it's not a conjunction, but it's a conjunction on the 12th harmonic. But so Hades is linked in as well. So I think that this Sun-Neptune opposition, because of its proximity to Mars, could be a problem. And and Hades is linked up as well. And so people may be trying all sorts of things, and then there is an unpleasantness in the air. And okay, as individuals we can get around it, but what about governments, groups of people? What happens? So I think that it's a problematic time, and we already know it's a problematic time. It's not just about this Sun opposition Neptune. We've just had Sun opposition Saturn. We've just had a full new moon eclipse. We've just had the equinox, and Saturn and Neptune just cannot be avoided. And so you could say that this Sun opposition Neptune, well, is really sort of more of the same. Now, as far as countries are concerned, well, one has to think about the United States, doesn't one? So here is a chart of the United States. So this Sun-Neptune opposition is right on the United States' midheaven, assuming we take 5:10 p.m. on July the 4th as a sort of a moment when the Declaration of Independence came into being. I think astrologers find that this midheaven works quite well. In my experience of the United States chart, I think that we somehow that the midheaven degree seems to work. So the United States has got the Sun exactly on its midheaven. It's got Neptune exactly on its descendant. Neptune exactly on its IC. So that Sun-Neptune opposition definitely hitting the United States, and so that may say something about government leadership, governmental leadership. It may say something about the president, but it may talk about the president's opponents. Maybe that is a way of looking at it. If the midheaven represents leadership, but the IC in the US could represent the president's opponents, and so with Neptune on the IC, the Sun opposite on the midheaven, it does seem that the country is not feeling entirely comfortable with itself. And so I think that we might see things going on in the United States which relate to Sun opposition Neptune. I mean, it could be about water, floods, something happening which is about sort of deception and nebulousness. But the United States, we should be looking at the United States. And another thing going on is a lot of countries are recognizing Palestine. And so Britain has recognized Palestine, France has recognized Palestine, I believe Australia has recognized Palestine. And so I was thinking, what does this mean for Palestine? What's going on in the Palestine chart? And so here is the chart for Palestine. And you would think that these countries recognizing Palestine should be good for Palestine. This is the chart for when Yasser Arafat announced Palestine's independence on November the 15th, 1988 in Algiers. And so looking at this chart, it's not a great chart. And the problem with this chart is that Mars is square Saturn, and it's also Mars is square Uranus. And so that Mars square Saturn is relevant. So it's kind of interesting that Neptune is on Palestine's Mars, and the Sun is not the Sun. The Sun is opposition Palestine's Mars. So that Sun-Mars opposition is hitting Mars. It's hitting Saturn. It's hitting Uranus. So it's hitting a rather difficult aspect in Palestine's chart. So what does that mean? And so if this does not seem to be great news for Palestine, that it's being recognized. Now, I was just trying to think about, why would that be the case? It might be the case that Israel will take the view that it has to respond, that it regards this recognition of Palestine as a reason for action, but it may be existential. So it could be that this recognition of Palestine by countries like Britain and France encourages Israel to take the war in Gaza further. Perhaps it's got to just complete this war. That the Declaration of Independence, the recognition of Palestine as a state is just going to encourage Israel to really respond in quite a violent way. I mean, more so than it already has been. So it could be that the recognition of Palestine could backfire on the Palestinians, and the Palestinians may not actually benefit from it. And maybe the astrology indicates this. I should also have looked at the horoscope of Hamas. I'm not saying I'm going to notice anything about Hamas, but here's a chart for Hamas when Hamas came into being in 1987. Yeah, again, I'm not saying that anything particular is going on. But I don't have an ascendant. I know I've got an ascendant listed here, but I can't see anything in particular, going on for Hamas because I don't have a time of birth for Hamas. So it's perhaps more about Palestine and that declaration of Palestine's independence in 1988. And I think that this Sun opposition Neptune suggests that maybe this recognition of Palestine, could backfire when we look at it, in the future. But those are a few thoughts on how this Sun opposition Neptune might work, and particularly looking at the charts of the USA and Palestine's independence chart. And then just a few charts of people who have Sun opposition Neptune, just to give us an idea. Oh, incidentally, on a grisly note, the first use of the gas chamber in the United States as a form of execution was on February the 8th, 1924. I think it was at 9:40 a.m. in Carson City, Nevada. And at the time of the first use of the gas chamber, the Sun was at 1843 Aquarius and Neptune was at 1901 Leo. So there was an exact Sun-Neptune opposition. And, Neptune has an association with gas and poisons. Of course, in the gas chamber, cyanide gas is used. And so that really fits the Sun-Neptune symbolism. And, with poisons, someone who is associated with poisons and sort of death by poisoning, or not death, by certainly injury by poisoning, was Alexander Navalny. So he was an opposition leader in Russia who didn't have quite as much support as people in the West claimed, but he was taken very ill on a flight in the middle of Russia, and he was attacked with nerve gas. We don't know quite who attacked him with nerve gas, and remember he went to Germany for treatment. And Alexander Navalny, let me just remove all of those hypotheticals. I don't think we need all those hypotheticals. So Alexander Navalny had, he's dead now, had a Sun-Neptune opposition in his chart. So he had the Sun at 13 Gemini, opposition Neptune. And so this might be someone who, with Sun opposition Neptune, is vulnerable to poisons. And this is indeed what seems to have happened. I mean, I don't know how he died. I mean, maybe his death had nothing to do with poisoning. I mean, it could be that his health was undermined by this nerve gas attack a few years earlier. And another person who I often look at who had a Sun-Neptune opposition is Alexander Marinesco. So Alexander Marinesco, he had, I don't know his time of birth, but Alexander Marinesco, he has double Sun-Neptune symbolism. So who's Alexander Marinesco? Well, of course, if you've been watching my videos constantly for the last couple of years, you'd know who Alexander Marinesco was. But he was, during the Second World War, he was the Soviet Union's submarine captain with the highest tonnage. In other words, he sunk more ships than anyone else. And, one reason that his tonnage was so high is because he torpedoed the Wilhelm Gustloff, which in the end of January 1945, and this was probably the greatest maritime disaster ever. The Titanic is nothing in comparison. The Wilhelm Gustloff could have had up to 10,000 people on board, and it was kind of a hospital ship, but not really, because it was also transporting military personnel from sort of what's now Poland across the Baltic because everyone was leaving Eastern Germany. And so he sunk this ship. And so being a submariner, being a successful submariner, you could say is a perfect symbolism for Sun opposition Neptune. And the trouble was he didn't really get much praise because he was due to be court-martialed. So he came in and he was going to be court-martialed anyway for drunkenness. He had a serious alcohol problem as well as being an effective submariner. And so he had this. You can see that Sun-Neptune opposition. He has it. And so the Sun-Neptune mariner, there's his submarines, being an effective submariner, having an alcohol problem. I think he wasn't awarded the was it the Order of Lenin? He was given the Order of Lenin posthumously because he got rehabilitated, but at the time he didn't get any recognition for sinking the Wilhelm Gustloff. But later, now he's sort of a hero in Russia. But it took its time, and maybe that also reflects Sun opposition Neptune. And someone who is in the news, and I have to be a bit careful what I say, is Brigitte Macron. Brigitte Macron is currently involved in a lawsuit against Candace Owens, because Candace Owens is claiming that Brigitte Macron is a man, and she has provided proof that she's a woman. And there's something a bit Sun-Neptune opposition about that. So there's Brigitte Macron's Sun at 23 Aries, her Neptune at 22, 23 Libra. So she's got a very close Sun-Neptune opposition. And I'm not going to say any more about that, but she certainly has this opposition aspect in her chart. And so Sun-Neptune oppositions, they can be problematic, and they can relate to the father and not being sure about one's father. If you're from the UK and perhaps from Australia, you might have heard of Paula Yates. Paula Yates was a television personality. She married Michael Hutchence. Michael Hutchence committed suicide or did she marry? I don't even know if they did marry. She had a relationship because she was married to Bob Geldof, and then she got involved with Michael Hutchence, and then he killed himself, I think. And so she had a Sun-Neptune opposition, and her Sun-Neptune opposition really kind of works pretty well. I mean, in the end, she died of a heroin overdose, so that fits the Sun-Neptune opposition. But it's more than that. It came out that her real father was not her claimed father. So she had this father, and I believe she thought that she knew who her father was. But then it turned out that her father was a man called Huey Green. So again, Huey Green probably means nothing to you unless you're in the UK and above a certain age. But Huey Green was an incredibly famous TV star. He had this talent show called Opportunity Knocks, and so it suddenly turned out that her father was Huey Green. So that's Sun-Neptune opposition, really not knowing who her real father is, and then this might be reflected in her attitude to relationships, and always looking for the right man, and the right man not quite being there. And of course, Michael Hutchence committed suicide in slightly strange circumstances, I think. And so again, there is the Sun-Neptune opposition. And a couple of European political figures who I probably should mention very briefly before I finish. Donald Tusk, Prime Minister of Poland. He has the Sun at 1 degree, 2 degree Taurus, opposition Neptune at 1 degree Scorpio. So I don't know enough about Donald Tusk to know how that Sun-Neptune is working, but here is someone who could get himself into trouble through his sort of misunderstandings and misapprehensions. And of course, he's in a very dangerous situation. I mean, things are getting complicated in Poland. Certain sections of Polish society are getting sick of the war in Ukraine. They're getting a bit sick of Ukrainians in general. And what is he going to do now? And of course, there are these sort of supposed attacks by Russia, these drones coming in, but we don't know where these drones came from. They might have been Ukrainians just taking some Russian drones and fixing them up with tape and then just sending them on to create some kind of false flag. And so perhaps, with Donald Tusk, if he's got a Sun-Neptune opposition, he may be very sensitive to the Sun-Neptune energy. So with the Sun-Neptune opposition, because he's got a Sun-Neptune opposition in his own chart, he's picking up on it. And it's a very close opposition. It's less than half a degree. So Donald Tusk, even though the Sun-Neptune opposition doesn't aspect his Sun-Neptune opposition, it might influence it. And he might get himself into a mess or just get confused about something. And the same with Maya Sandu. So Maya Sandu is the president of Moldova, and I've already looked at Moldova, and I've looked at the astrocartography of Moldova with the equinox, and I think that Moldova is potentially going to be influenced in quite a big way with the equinox. And don't forget, on Sunday we've got parliamentary elections in Moldova, and Maya Sandu has a pretty close Sun-Neptune opposition in her chart. So she might be picking up on this Sun-Neptune energy. And of course, we know that Maya Sandu, she's sort of very pro-Western. She's regarded perhaps as some kind of dictator. I'm not saying she is a dictator, but opposition leaders, have been arrested, and she may misunderstand the situation in her country, and she might make a mistake, and especially as she's got that Sun-Neptune opposition and got parliamentary elections. The equinox is hitting Moldova, quite hard, and so that might be something that we need to look at. So those are my thoughts on Sun-Neptune opposition. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.